Well, thank you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you all for being with us all tonight. And I'm sorry I'm on the telephone. This really seems very, very old fashioned, but maybe that's what it should be, since I'm talking about St. Katharine Drexel, and she lived in a different era, and I think would have been just astonished that we could actually do this. And I am very happy when you have your book fair to answer questions there as well. So if there's something that you didn't get answered tonight, I will be there with books and can speak to you then. So this is my real homage to my relative, St. Katharine Drexel.
Excuse me, Cordelia, just tell me when to advance the slide.
I will. I'm going to leave it here for a little while until I go to her as a child. As we know, heroic goodness was the term applied to Katharine Drexel during her process for canonization. The Catholic Church, as you probably also know, requires 2 verified miracles. In St. Katharine's case, the miracles involved hearing, one of a young man who'd gone deaf and the other of a girl who was born deaf. Both were healed after their families prayed to Katharine. And in my mind, it's as if she and all she embodied and accomplished as an impassioned advocate for social justice is urging us to listen to the cries of those in need that surround us at every moment. I grew up hearing family anecdotes and stories about Katharine Drexel. My grandfather was the son of Katharine's adored first cousin, Emily, who married Edward Biddle. Emily died young. Her children were raised by their maternal grandfather, Anthony Drexel of Drexel University. When Katharine's mother died as the result of childbirth, she and her older sister also lived with Anthony and his wife, meaning that my grandfather's youth was similar to Katharine's. The founder of Drexel University, which, by the way, was co-educational from the start, looked like a stern, exacting man, but he was fun-loving and a devoted parent and grandparent. He loved reading aloud to the kids. He had no formal education past the age of 12, and he dedicated his resources to helping others learn. And this is, oh, you can go ahead, that's great. Go ahead to the next one.
Okay.
So this is Ray Street Wharf near Frank and Hannah Drexel's home. Katharine's life story has haunted me as long as I can remember. I always wanted to know more. What was this woman like as a person? Who was she as a child? How did her personality and strength of character evolve? And how did she come to make these remarkable decisions? In the midst of our contemporary era of vast wealth, crushing poverty, and desperate need for social justice, her work among the poor and disenfranchised is especially pertinent. I view Katharine Drexel as a model for all who seek to make the world a better place. Let me give you some historical context. She was born in 1858. Her parents were Frances Drexel, a Catholic of Austrian descent, and Hannah Langstroth Drexel, whose family were members of the German Baptist Brethren. And as you see, here we have Ray Street Wharf near the Drexel's home. And we can go to the next one, which is the same area. Next slide, please. This is Race and Front Streets. And the next one, which is Goebbels Saloon. So it really shows you how German we were. our city had such strong German roots. When Frank remarried 3 years after Hannah's death, it was to Emma Bouvier, a Catholic of French descent. The French language tortured Katherine all of her life. One of her childhood writing exercises was to pen a letter to her chère maman, as she called her, in French. The efforts gave her no end of grief, as I discovered from reading her journals. And those were in the archives at the Mother House of the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament in Bensalem. The Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament, as you know, was the order that she founded. And their mission was to educate the forgotten of the nation, the African Americans and Native Americans. And let's go to the next slide, please, which shows young Katie Drexel at home. And this was at 1503 Walnut Street. And I passed this house. It's no longer a house, it's a shop now. Every day when I go up to Drexel, it always haunts me that I am looking at this house where this child lived. Because her financier grandfather and father and uncle helped bankroll the Union's cause during the Civil War to the tune of $60 million, Katie, as she was called as a child, grew up hearing discussions about the evils of slavery. That was a constant conversation in the household, and that would alter her life. So let's go to the next slide, please. And here we have the Philadelphia Inquirer, victory declared at the end of the Civil War. And obviously the whole of the city celebrated. It was a day of great rejoicing. The terrible grinding war was finally at an end. And could I have the next slide, please? And this was less than just a week later that John Wilkes Booth assassinated President Lincoln. And the next slide, please. This is a picture of Lincoln's funeral cortege. The entire city turned out to grieve. It's hard for us to recognize now what it was like, unless the Eagles win or something, or did win, that the entire city turned out and people were sobbing. There was no other noise because the funeral cortege itself was silent, except for people weeping. And the cortege passed directly in front of Katherine's house. So if you can imagine what it would be like for a very sensitive child to see this scene in the front of your house. People were standing on top of buildings. They were standing anywhere they could so that they could have a glimpse of this terrible tragedy unfurling in front of them. I think that that impacted her life enormously. Then came, as we know, Reconstruction, the genocide of the indigenous peoples, the rise of the KKK, the women's suffrage movement, Jim Crow, the equal rights movement, the founding of the NAACP, and the anti-lynch law that shamefully took several years to pass. My focus in writing Katharine Drexel's story was to put her squarely within this historical time frame, while also examining the injustices that she sought to redress. As a teen, though, and a young lady of enormous privilege, Kate, as she then called herself, enjoyed European travel, summers visiting family at the New Jersey shore, new clothes. She was wonderfully vain and wrote about all the clothes endlessly and how fabulous her hair looked, and flirtations with the opposite sex. And yes, she received a marriage proposal. Summer holidays with her cousins were free and easy times with a noticeable lack of chaperones. Kate had a wicked sense of humor. She didn't suffer fools gladly and was most definitely not a saint. Impatience was an ongoing battle all of her life. I think I inherited that, but not the saintly part. And could we go to the next slide, please? Here she is as young Kate. And then the next slide, please, too. This was their summer home, San Michel in Torresdale. But she also had a very serious side, keeping private diaries in which she attempted to understand God and whether God wanted her to be something more than a wealthy society woman. I believe that she felt trapped by the expectations of her Biddle and Drexel and Van Rensselaer relatives. Even though her mother, Emma, supplied food and clothing to the indigent, opening her house one day a week, Kate felt called to be more than just a Lady Bountiful. Emma died in 1883, which plunged Frank into a debilitating grief from which he never fully recovered. He died 2 years later, and Kate's sorrow became so acute that she suffered what today might be diagnosed as a nervous breakdown. Her uncle Anthony advised that her sisters take her abroad to a healing spa in Germany. She was then 27. She had never been free of parental rule. They quit the spa. The three sisters raced through Europe, having as many hair-raising adventures as they possibly could, which they wisely hid from Uncle Anthony. In my mind, it's clear that she was trying to run away from herself. Her tortured inner life grew more frenzied. One moment she was worldly and ebullient, the next in yearning conversation with God. The three, as she and her sisters referred to themselves, were then the wealthiest heiresses in the nation. Throughout the country, newspaper headlines had trumpeted the sum they inherited, $14 million, or in today's markets, $448 million. Returning to the United States, her affluent sisters followed the conventional route of marriage and charitable activities that was accepted within their sphere, while Kate continued to wrestle with her sense of call. And could I have the next two slides, which are going to show you the Pullman Palace cars of the era? So this is how the wealthy would have traveled. It was not Amtrak, as you see, or SEPTA. And could we see the next one too, please? The journals that Kate began keeping were entitled Strictly Private, The Holy Ghost Speaking to My Soul. They reveal her as an impassioned woman at war with her understanding of God, seeking to act through and within her, as well as her terror, real terror of living into God's call. What would that mean? Not yet convinced of her own merit and stamina, she'd begun supplying money for schools in tribal lands, the Drexel Indian schools, as they were called. And she journeyed through the southern Dakota territories, not by Pullman car, meeting the august Lakota Sioux chief Red Cloud at Pine Ridge Reservation, before continuing her travels into southern Lake Superior and the White Earth and Red Lake reservations in present-day Minnesota. I think it's important to note that in the aftermath of the massacre at the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1890, Red Cloud ordered his warriors to protect the Drexel School when the tribe rose up in defiance of government slaughter. And may I have the next slide, which shows this Pine Ridge. So Chief Red Cloud said, "No, you may not burn this school." Those treks west were grueling for a woman who had been raised with every creature comfort. Buckboards without springs, sleeping arrangements that were highly primitive. As I said, no Pullman cars. And also consider the clothing appropriate to an Easterner with means. Bustles, bonnets, gloves, dainty shoes, hardly dressed, really that would have equipped her for roughing it. Kate found herself flummoxed, but she persevered. In one journal entry that I found, she described a desert setting at night, surrounded by yipping coyotes. She was served cold beans and chili. There was almost no light to see to eat. She studied her tin plate, lifted up a roundish object, and politely asked if it was a doily. The doily was a tortilla. She'd never seen a tortilla before. Despite, or maybe because of the hardships, she returned home convinced that education was the only means to empower the indigenous peoples. She also understood she needed to actively participate rather than be a benefactor. Taking holy vows was her first step. A wonderful journal entry shows her weighing the pros and cons of becoming a nun. She was a banker's daughter and a pragmatist after all. Let me read some samples. Quote, "My reasons for entering religion. 1. Jesus Christ has given his life for me. It is but just that I should give him mine. 2. The attainment of perfection should be our chief employment in life. Our Lord has laid a price upon its requirement when he says, 'If thou wilt be perfect, go sell what thou hast and give to the poor, and thou shalt have treasure in heaven, and come follow me. He that followeth me walketh not in darkness.'" To which she added, how can I doubt that these words are true wisdom? And if true wisdom, why not act upon them? And then my objections to entering religion. 1, I hate community life. I should think it maddening to come in constant contact with so many different old maidish dispositions. I hate never to be alone. As you see, impatience. 2, superiors are frequently selected on account of their holiness, not for ability. I should hate to owe submission to a woman I felt to be stupid and whose orders showed a thorough want of judgment. Oh dear. And then 3, I do not know how I could bear the privations and poverty of the religious life. I have never been deprived of luxuries. When with very slight variety, the same things are exacted of me day in and day out, year in and year out, I fear that weariness, disgust, and a want of final perseverance might lead me to leave the convent. And what then? Well, we know the outcome of those internal arguments. Renouncing millions ran newspaper headlines from Philadelphia to San Francisco when she became a postulant. Her cousins, who were ensconced in their sumptuous mansions and owning their luxurious yachts, considered her choice dangerously radical. In truth, I think that they were probably challenged and made deeply uncomfortable by her self-sacrifice. Sister Mary Katherine became Mother Katharine Drexel, founding her teaching order, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. She began her work with the Native Americans, starting schools in New Mexico and Arizona, then created schools for African Americans in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, Tennessee, Texas, and Louisiana. Xavier in New Orleans, which began as a day school in 1904 and has now become the impressive Xavier University, required a straw purchaser because none of the neighbors wanted her. The sisters that taught in these far-flung places were as undaunted as she. But racial prejudice remained perplexing, as most of the women hailed from the North. Why couldn't a teacher sit with her students in a trolley car? Why were audiences segregated so that only whites had the opportunity to hear classical music and opera? Why shouldn't they become physicians and professors? So let's go to Katherine in her habit, please. The next slide. And here she is in Chinle, Arizona in 1927. And then the next, which is a Hopi village in 1927 as well. She traveled every year to every one of her schools and talked via letter to all of the nuns continuously. She became ill, she traveled so often. And then the beginning of Xavier University in New Orleans is their next slide, please. Mother Katharine's schools and their students became constant targets for the KKK, as did her mother house in Bensalem during its construction. In Beaumont, East Texas, the KKK posted the school just after she left to journey to Louisiana. They threatened to burn it to the ground. They waited until she left because these big burly men were terrified of this petite but indomitable woman. However, they terrorized the teachers, parents, and students. In the archives, I found arithmetic exercises and spelling tests from 8 and 9-year-olds in Beaumont. I yearned to find out how those children fared. I do know that they were not able to burn down that school because some kind of a mighty wind came and blew out all the flames that they intended to start. So that terrified them even more than Katherine, because they realized perhaps it was God being against them. And can we go to the last slide, please? which is Mother Katherine with the Willits family in New Orleans. I love this picture. Kate's crusade continued. Nothing deterred her. Nothing frightened her. Even a papal encyclical that forbade coeducational schools. Mother Katherine replied to the Vatican representative in Washington in person that all of her schools had always been coeducational. She was polite, but she brooked no argument. She understood that she was obeying a higher law. To my mind, her story speaks to all of us of all faiths and histories, encouraging us to become dangerously good. Or, in her own words, think it, desire it, speak it, act it. Thank you very much for putting up with me talking on the phone. And now I'm happy to have some questions.
Thank you, Cordelia. It was fascinating. Okay, so we're going to have to wing it a little bit here. In the audience, if anybody has a question, if you would raise your hand and speak it, and then I'll have to speak it into the microphone, and then hold the microphone up so Cordelia, you could answer it. And then Fred, if you could do the chat questions.
Well, you've got my phone, so no,
You can't do it here?
I might
Okay, so, yes, ma'am.
doubt it.
She mentioned that she visited the White Earth Indian Reservation.
What?
She mentioned in her presentation that Mother Drexel visited the White Earth Indian Reservation. Does she know of any contacts when she went there on her visit?
So you mentioned, Cordelia, that Katherine visited the what?
White Earth Indian Reservation.
White
White Earth.
Oh, White Earth Reservation.
She visited all those reservations, red, that's what it's red earth and white. And yes, she visited them all. But it was at, she started the other school, and that was the one that remained.
But I think she was asking.
It was the school that she started was the Pine Ridge.
You have a,
Where is San Michelle?
where is San Michelle located in Tarsdale?
Forestdale, yes.
Yeah, well, we can answer that. Excuse me. It's now part of the hospital campus of Jefferson Tarsdale Hospital. What's called the Mansion House as part of the administration.
Might have more to say.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to let Cordelia answer too. But also, I'm going to say that in September, our group visited the Shrine of the True Cross Chapel that Katharine Drexel's sister, Louise Morel, had built in the 1930s. Cordelia, do you have anything to add?
No, I don't. I mean, it's still very haunting to me to go to those places because I'm so intimately involved with her her relationship with Louise and how tragic it was for her when Louise died. So to me, it's not just a place, it's all that history, that family history.
Question in the audience? Anybody? Yes, Denise. Somebody wants to know, Cordelia, what's the relationship between you and Katharine Drexel?
Yes, Emily, her first cousin was Emily Drexel Biddle, who was my great-great-grandmother.
Ooh.
And I own the wedding portrait of Emily Drexel Biddle, and I've owned this my whole life, or after my grandmother gave it to me, And I woke up working on this book, and I said, oh, I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when Emily got married, because she was the eldest of the cousins to get married. And then woke up and said, wait, I've looked at this wedding dress for as long as I can remember. I was a fly on the wall.
There you go. Okay, Fred, is there another question on the chat?
Can you put the chats up, Ray?
And anybody in the audience in the meantime? Anybody else? Okay, so
No, they're
while
on.
we're looking at the chats, Cordelia, is Katharine Drexel in that wedding picture?
No, she's not. It's just Emily in her wedding dress. So, but she was, you know, Emily was a young woman and Katherine was a girl then. But I just imagined what it was like for a young girl to see her older cousin in this very elaborate costume. Really beautiful.
Yeah, and there's very few pictures of, well, there's a few pictures of Katharine, very few of Louise. And-
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
There aren't anymore.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay, so anybody else, any final questions? So this has been quite an adventure, technologically, but somehow we made it through. Thank you so much, Cordelia, for your excellent talk and your flexibility as we navigated this. And we look forward to seeing you on April 13th at the History Fair with your books.
And if anybody thinks of a question, come and talk to me and I'll answer as best I can.
Okay. All right. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. And thank you, Cordelia.
Thank you very much. Thank you.